A German soldier crouches in a muddy trench, clutching a strange device that looks like a metal soup can with three magnets sticking out like spider legs. He waits as a Soviet T-34 tank rumbles closer, its tracks grinding over broken earth. The soldier doesn't run. He charges straight at the steel beast, slaps the device onto its side with a metallic clang, pulls a cord, and sprints away. 5 seconds later, a focused jet of molten copper tears through 8 inches of armor like tissue paper, turning the inside of that tank into an inferno. This is the story of the Hafthohlladung, the magnetic anti-tank mine that German engineers designed to turn desperate soldiers into tank killers with nothing but courage and a magnetic bomb. And what you're about to discover will change everything you thought you knew about World War II tank warfare. The year is 1942, and the German Wehrmacht is facing a nightmare on the Eastern Front, because Soviet factories are churning out T-34 tanks faster than Germany can destroy them. These machines have sloped armor that deflects standard anti-tank rounds like raindrops off a windshield. German infantrymen watch helplessly as their rifles and grenades bounce harmlessly off these rolling fortresses while their comrades are crushed beneath the treads. The Panzer Grenadiers, Germany's tank-hunting infantry, are dying by the thousands, trying to stop these beasts with weapons that simply don't work. Conventional anti-tank rifles are useless against the T-34's frontal armor. Magnetic anti-tank mines existed, but they were heavy, complicated, and required the soldier to get dangerously close with no guarantee of success. So Germany's military engineers receive an urgent directive to create a weapon that any soldier can carry, that will stick to enemy armor, and that will absolutely, positively destroy any tank it touches. The weapon needs to be foolproof, portable, and devastatingly effective. And what they created was something the Allies had never seen before. Deep in German weapons laboratories, engineers are experimenting with something called the Monroe effect, a phenomenon discovered decades earlier but never properly weaponized. And here's the secret that will blow your mind. When you detonate an explosive charge with a cone-shaped hollow carved into it, something extraordinary happens. The explosion doesn't just blow outward in all directions. Instead, the shaped cavity focuses the blast into a superheated jet of metal and explosive gases that moves at speeds exceeding 25,000 feet per second. Think about that for a moment, because that's faster than most rifle bullets. That's 7 times the speed of sound. The jet isn't just hot and fast, it's capable of liquefying metal on contact, punching through armor not by brute force alone, but by creating a hyper-concentrated stream of destruction that burns and tears its way through steel like a cutting torch from hell. But how do you get this devastating weapon close enough to a moving tank to actually use it? That's where the magnetic genius comes in, and this is where the story gets absolutely incredible. The Hafthohlladung, literally adhesive hollow charge, weighs just over 7 pounds. It's cylindrical, about the size of a large coffee can, painted field gray. But the revolutionary part involves 3 powerful electromagnets around the base like the legs of a metal spider. These magnets are strong enough that once you slam this device onto the side of a tank, it's not coming off. The tank can move, it can try to shake it loose, but that bomb is staying put until it detonates. The shaped charge inside contains 3.3 pounds of high explosive formed around a copper-lined cone. And when it detonates, that copper liner collapses inward at impossible speeds, forming a jet of superheated metal traveling at hypersonic velocity. The result is penetration capability of over 8 inches of solid steel armor. And here's what makes this absolutely terrifying. No tank in 1942, not the Soviet T-34, not the American Sherman, not even the British Churchill, had armor thick enough to stop it. Picture this moment, because it's frozen morning near Stalingrad. A German Panzer Grenadier section is dug into defensive positions when the rumble begins. Soviet tanks, 5 of them, T-34s rolling forward with infantry behind them. The Germans have no anti-tank guns in range, no panzers for support. They have rifles, machine guns, and 4 Hafthohlladung mines. The squad leader selects his 4 best men. They're young, most of them barely 20, and they understand that what they're about to do is essentially suicide work. But the alternative is watching their position get overrun. The tanks come closer, 300 meters, 200. The German machine guns open fire not at the tanks because bullets can't hurt them, but at the Soviet infantry, forcing them to take cover and separate from their armored support. This is crucial because a tank without infantry support is vulnerable. 100 meters and the first German soldier breaks from cover, sprinting in a zigzag pattern toward the lead T-34. The tank's machine gun erupts, tracers cutting through the air. But the soldier is fast, and the tank gunner is panicking. The soldier reaches the tank from its blind spot, where the driver can't see him and the commander can't depress the gun low enough. He slams the Hafthohlladung against the tank's side armor with both hands and the magnets connect with a satisfying thunk. He yanks the pull igniter, a simple friction device like a firecracker fuse, and the mechanical delay timer begins its 5-second countdown. He runs. 1 second passes, and the tank crew realizes something is attached to their vehicle. 2 seconds, and the driver throws the tank into reverse, trying to shake loose whatever death has just attached itself to their armor. 3 seconds, and the commander screams into the intercom for everyone to bail out. 4 seconds, and the loader is halfway out of his hatch when the shaped charge detonates with a focused crack rather than a massive boom. But the effect is catastrophic, because the hypersonic jet of molten copper punches through the side armor like it isn't even there, enters the crew compartment, and ignites the ammunition stored inside. Secondary explosions rip the turret clean off the tank chassis, sending it spinning through the air like a child's toy. The other 3 German soldiers reach their targets, and 2 more T-34s die in quick succession, their crews immolated before they can react. The 4th soldier takes a machine gun burst to the chest and falls 10 meters from his target tank, the Hafthohlladung still clutched in his dead hands. But 3 out of 5 tanks are burning wrecks. The Soviet attack falters, the German line holds, and this scene played out hundreds of times across the Eastern Front, from the frozen steppes of Russia to the rebel-choked streets of Berlin. If you're fascinated by hidden WW2 secrets like this, make sure to like the video, because what made the Hafthohlladung truly revolutionary wasn't just the explosive, it was the magnets. And creating magnets strong enough to hold a 7-pound bomb to a tank moving across rough terrain while also being light enough for a soldier to carry required metallurgical expertise that was cutting edge for the 1940s. German engineers used powerful permanent magnets made from iron-cobalt alloys arranged in a triangular pattern to distribute the magnetic force evenly. The magnets had to work even when the tank's armor was covered in mud, ice, or the anti-magnetic paste that Soviet tankers started applying once they learned about the Hafthohlladung threat. But here's something most people don't know, and this detail is absolutely crucial. The magnets weren't just for attachment, they were also a safety feature, because the bomb couldn't be accidentally armed unless it was magnetically attached to a ferrous metal surface. In other words, you couldn't accidentally blow yourself up unless you were actually touching a tank with it. The pull igniter used a chemical delay fuse that gave the soldier exactly 5 seconds to get clear, not 3 seconds, which wouldn't be enough time, not 10 seconds, which would give the tank crew time to dislodge it. 5 seconds was the perfect balance between survival and certainty. Soviet tank commanders began to experience a new kind of fear that was unlike anything they'd faced before, because in previous battles, being inside a tank meant safety. Armor protected you from bullets, from shrapnel, from artillery fragments. You were invincible. But now there were German soldiers carrying bombs that could stick to your tank and blow through any armor. And because the attack required the enemy to get within arm's reach of your vehicle, there was something deeply personal, almost intimate about this form of warfare. It wasn't a distant artillery shell or an anti-tank gun firing from a kilometer away. It was a man running straight at you, willing to die just to ensure you died with him. Soviet tank training manuals from 1943 onward include specific sections on the Hafthohlladung threat. Tank crews were instructed to never operate without infantry support, to constantly move even when stationary targets were available, and to immediately bail out if they heard the distinctive metallic clang of a magnetic mine attaching to their hull. Some Soviet tanks began carrying infantry on their exteriors, riding on the engine deck or fenders, specifically to shoot any German soldier who got close enough to attach a magnetic mine. The psychological impact cannot be overstated because tank crews who survived Hafthohlladung attacks described the sound of the magnet connecting to their armor as the most terrifying noise of the war. Once you heard that sound, you had maybe 5 seconds to escape a steel coffin before it became your crematorium. And if you want to discover more untold WW2 stories and deadly hidden technologies, subscribe now, because what you're about to see next will blow your mind. The original Hafthohlladung 3, the H3 as it was designated, was so successful that German engineers immediately began work on improved versions. The Hafthohlladung 3.5, introduced in late 1943, featured a larger shaped charge with greater penetration capability, over 10 inches of armor, and a more powerful magnetic attachment system that could hold even on sloped armor surfaces. There were specialized variants too, and the Hafthohlladung 5.5 was designed specifically for attacking bunkers and fortifications with a wider explosive charge that created a larger breach but with less penetration depth. Combat engineers loved these for blowing holes in concrete walls during urban warfare. The Japanese, Germany's ally, received technical specifications for the Hafthohlladung and developed their own version called the Type 3 magnetic mine. But Japanese manufacturing capabilities couldn't match German metallurgy, and their magnets were weaker, their shape charges less effective. Still, Japanese soldiers used them in desperate banzai charges against American Sherman tanks in the Pacific, though with limited success. Germany produced over 500,000 Hafthohlladung mines during the war, and you need to think about that number for a moment. That's enough to equip every infantry company on both the eastern and western fronts with dozens of tank-killing weapons. The production was so extensive that even in the final months of the war, with Germany's industrial base crumbling under Allied bombing, factories were still churning out these magnetic mines. American and British intelligence officers who examined captured Hafthohlladung devices were simultaneously impressed and terrified because the shaped charge technology was more advanced than anything in the Allied arsenal at the time. The magnetic attachment system was elegantly simple yet highly effective. But what secret engineering inside this weapon made it far deadlier than anyone expected? It wasn't just the penetration capability, it was the reliability. German weapons engineering during WW2 was obsessive about quality control. Every Hafthohlladung that left the factory was tested. The magnetic force was measured. The shaped charge geometry was precisely machined. The chemical delay fuse was calibrated. The result was a weapon that worked virtually every time it was used correctly. Allied weapons designers began their own crash programs to develop similar devices. The British produced the Hawkins mine and later the magnetic anti-tank mine, but these were primarily designed for placement rather than hand emplacement under fire. The Americans developed the M1 sticky bomb, which used an adhesive coating rather than magnets, but it was heavier, less reliable, and unpopular with troops who worried about the adhesive sticking to their own uniforms. None of the Allied equivalents matched the elegant simplicity and lethality of the German Hafthohlladung. Tank designers responded by changing armor composition and applying anti-magnetic coatings. Soviet factories began producing tanks with Zimmerit paste, a hard coating applied to armor that prevented magnetic mines from attaching. But Zimmerit had its own problems because it was time-consuming to apply. It cracked under temperature changes, and some varieties were potentially flammable. By 1944, many Soviet tank units had stopped using it, deciding that the risk of magnetic mines was preferable to the guaranteed problems of Zimmerit. The Hafthohlladung reached its most desperate and tragic usage during the final defense of Berlin in April 1945, when the city was surrounded by Soviet forces equipped with thousands of tanks. The remaining German defenders included old men from the Volkssturm militia, teenage boys from the Hitler Youth, and the last remnants of Wehrmacht units retreating from all fronts. These defenders had almost no anti-tank weapons left except for Panzerfausts, single-shot rocket launchers, and Hafthohlladung mines. In the rebel-choked streets of Berlin, where visibility was measured in meters and every corner could hide an ambush, the magnetic mine found its final purpose. Elderly men and 15-year-old boys were given hasty training about the pull cord, waiting 5 seconds, and running. Then they were sent into the streets to stop Soviet tanks with nothing but courage and a magnetic bomb. The Soviets adapted by welding metal screens and chains around their tanks to prevent the magnetic mines from reaching the main armor. German soldiers responded by targeting the tracks, the engine deck, anywhere the mine could attach. The Battle of Berlin saw some of the most brutal close-quarters tank combat of the entire war. Soviet tankers welded armor plates over their vision ports and drove blind, guided by infantry, because opening a port meant a Panzerfaust or grenade might come through. German defenders turned entire city blocks into death traps, luring tanks into courtyards where soldiers could attack from windows and basements with magnetic mines. One account describes a 72-year-old Volkssturm member who destroyed 2 Soviet tanks in a single day using Hafthohlladung mines, only to be killed by a third tank's machine gun while attempting his third attack. Another tells of a 16-year-old Hitler Youth member who survived attaching a mine to a Stalin heavy tank, a beast with armor too thick for conventional anti-tank weapons, and watched as the shaped charge punched through and brewed up the vehicle, silencing its massive gun forever. These were not heroic victories. They were desperate, tragic moments in a lost war. But they demonstrated the terrible effectiveness of the weapon Germany had created. When the war ended and Allied technical intelligence teams swept through Germany, they shipped entire warehouses of Hafthohlladung mines back to Britain and America for study. The shaped charge technology became the foundation for modern anti-tank weapons. Every RPG, every anti-tank missile, every modern anti-armor warhead uses the same Monroe effect that German engineers perfected in the Hafthohlladung. The magnetic attachment concept influenced mine design for decades. Even today, modern naval mines and some anti-vehicle devices use magnetic triggers and attachment systems descended from German WW2 technology. But here's what makes the Hafthohlladung truly remarkable in the history of warfare, and this is the part that changed everything. It represented a democratization of tank-killing capability. Before its introduction, stopping a tank required specialized weapons, anti-tank guns, other tanks, or exceptionally brave soldiers with satchel charges who had to crawl underneath the vehicle. After the Hafthohlladung, any infantryman with sufficient courage could destroy any tank. That changed the calculus of armored warfare forever, because it meant tanks could no longer operate freely in areas with enemy infantry. It meant armor had to be thicker, tactics had to be more cautious, combined arms operations became absolutely mandatory. The era of tanks as invincible breakthrough weapons was over, killed by a 7-pound magnetic bomb that cost less than a tank's machine gun to manufacture. The soldiers who carried these weapons paid an extraordinary price, because statistics from the Eastern Front suggest that soldiers attempting to attach Hafthohlladung mines to enemy tanks under combat conditions had roughly a 40% casualty rate. That means 2 out of every 5 men who tried to use this weapon died in the attempt. Think about what that means for just a moment. Imagine being handed this device, knowing that your chances of survival are barely better than a coin flip. Knowing that even if you succeed in attaching the mine, you have only 5 seconds to sprint away from a vehicle that might be moving, might be shooting at you, and might have infantry support that will cut you down the moment you break cover. Yet thousands of men did exactly that. German soldiers on the Eastern Front, Japanese troops in the Pacific, and in the final desperate months of the war, old men and teenage boys in the defense of Berlin. They did it because they were ordered to, because they believed in their cause, or simply because they saw no other choice. The Hafthohlladung was a weapon born of desperation, perfected through engineering genius and employed through raw courage. It represented both the pinnacle of German weapons development and the depths of desperation that drove men to become human anti-tank weapons. What made the Hafthohlladung's shaped charge so devastatingly effective compared to conventional explosives comes down to the physics of the Monroe effect at its most refined level. When the explosive detonates, the detonation wave travels through the explosive material faster than the speed of sound in that material. When this wave reaches the copper cone liner, it doesn't simply blow the copper outward. Instead, the geometry of the cone causes the copper to collapse inward at an angle, and the collision of the collapsing cone walls creates a jet of superplastic metal particles traveling at hypersonic velocities. This jet isn't molten in the sense of being melted by heat, though temperatures do exceed 1,000 degrees Celsius. It's actually a hydrodynamic penetration phenomenon, where the metal behaves like a fluid under extreme pressure, flowing through the target armor like water through paper. The tip of the jet can reach velocities exceeding 8,000 meters per second. When this jet hits armor, it creates a hole through sheer kinetic energy and plastic deformation. The armor doesn't have time to flex or distribute the impact. The jet simply punches through, carrying fragments of both the jet material and the armor into the interior of the tank, where they become secondary projectiles, shrapnel that ricochets around the crew compartment at lethal velocities. Behind the primary jet comes a slower-moving slug of copper and explosive residue that widens the hole and carries additional thermal energy into the tank. If the tank is carrying ammunition or fuel, and every tank does, this thermal energy often triggers secondary explosions that complete the destruction the shaped charge began. The entire process from detonation to complete armor penetration takes less than a millisecond. The crew of a tank hit by a Hafthohlladung had no warning, no chance to react, no possibility of survival if they were in the path of the jet. There are stories from the Eastern Front that were never officially recorded, accounts that survived only in personal letters and post-war memoirs. One Soviet tank commander wrote about finding a destroyed German position where 5 young soldiers had died, each clutching an unused Hafthohlladung, killed by artillery before they could reach the Soviet tanks that rolled past their bodies. The magnets, he noted, were so strong that even in death, the soldiers' hands were difficult to pry from the metal casings. A British intelligence report from 1945 describes interrogating a captured German sergeant who had personally destroyed 11 Allied tanks using Hafthohlladung mines over the course of 2 years. When asked how he survived so many attacks, he replied that he didn't know, that he simply ran faster than the bullets, fought faster than the tank commanders, and got lucky 11 times. He was 20 years old. An American after-action report from the Battle of the Bulge mentions finding German bodies frozen in attack positions, Hafthohlladung mines still strapped to their bodies, victims of American tank machine guns. The report notes with grim professional interest that the magnetic mines remained active and dangerous even after their carriers were dead, requiring engineers to carefully remove them from the frozen corpses. These stories illustrated truth about the Hafthohlladung that specifications and technical drawings cannot convey. This was a weapon that demanded the ultimate price from those who wielded it, and it delivered absolute destruction to those it was used against. After 1945, the Hafthohlladung vanished from active military use, but its influence echoed through every subsequent decade of weapons development. When the Soviet Union designed its RKG-7, the most ubiquitous anti-tank weapon in history, the shaped charge warhead was a direct descendant of German research. When America developed the M72 law and later the Javelin missile system, German wartime studies on shaped charge optimization informed the design. Modern anti-tank mines, from the German DM-31 to the American M19, use magnetic influence fuses that detect the metal signature of approaching vehicles, technology pioneered in weapons like the Hafthohlladung. Explosive ordnance disposal technicians are still trained to recognize and safely disarm WW2-era German magnetic mines found buried in former battlefields across Europe and Russia. Perhaps most significantly, the Hafthohlladung proved that infantry could remain relevant on the mechanized battlefield. Before its introduction, military theorists believed that tanks would eventually make infantry obsolete. After the magnetic mine demonstrated that a determined infantryman could destroy any tank, the theory shifted. Tanks and infantry were inseparable, each dependent on the other for survival. This principle remains true today because modern battle tanks have reactive armor, active protection systems, and sophisticated defensive measures, but they still require infantry support to guard against close-range attacks. The lesson learned from thousands of destroyed tanks in WW2, that armor alone cannot guarantee survival, has never been forgotten. How many tanks did the Hafthohlladung destroy during World War II? The exact number will never be known because German records were destroyed in the war's final chaotic months. Soviet records classified many losses to avoid revealing tactical vulnerability. Allied intelligence estimates vary wildly. Conservative estimates suggest at least 3,000 tanks were destroyed or disabled by magnetic mines on the Eastern Front alone. Some historians argue the real number is closer to 5,000 or even higher when all fronts are considered. That's more tanks than most nations fielded in their entire armed forces. Each destroyed tank represented not just millions of dollars in lost equipment, but 4 or 5 trained crew members killed or wounded, a tactical advantage lost, a battlefield objective uncaptured. The strategic impact of this relatively simple weapon was enormous. Yet the Hafthohlladung also represented tragedy, because the casualty rates among soldiers who used these weapons were catastrophic. Entire squads of Panzer Grenadiers were wiped out in single engagements. In the desperate final months of the war, hundreds of undertrained teenagers and elderly Volkssturm members were sent against Soviet tanks with magnetic mines and little else, and most never returned. The Hafthohlladung, a 7-pound magnetic mine with a shaped charge warhead, seems almost absurdly simple compared to modern weapons technology. No guidance systems, no electronics, no complex manufacturing. Just magnets, explosives, and a pull cord fuse. But it represented a revolution in warfare, as significant as any technical advance of World War II, because it proved that infantry could fight armor on equal terms. It validated the shaped charge principle that now dominates anti-tank warfare. It demonstrated that magnetic attachment could be weaponized effectively, and it showed that sometimes the most effective weapons aren't the most complex. They're the ones that solve a specific problem with elegant simplicity. The tanks that faced the Hafthohlladung were technological marvels with advanced engines, sophisticated optics, precisely manufactured weapon systems, yet they could be destroyed by a device simple enough that frontline workshops could assemble them from basic components. That asymmetry, that David and Goliath dynamic, is what made the weapon so psychologically devastating to Allied tank crews, and so desperately valuable to German forces. In the streets of Stalingrad, in the hedgerows of Normandy, in the rubble of Berlin, the magnetic mine proved that courage, desperation, and clever engineering could overcome tons of steel armor and superior numbers. The cost in human life was terrible. The effectiveness was undeniable. The Hafthohlladung is largely forgotten today, overshadowed by more famous weapons like the Tiger tank, the V-2 rocket, or the atomic bomb. But for the tank crews who faced it and the soldiers who carried it, this magnetic mine was the most terrifying weapon of the war. It stuck to steel like death's own handprint. It penetrated armor that was supposed to be impenetrable. It turned ordinary soldiers into tank killers and transformed the battlefield into a place where even the mightiest war machines were vulnerable to a man with courage and a magnetic bomb. The next time you read about shape-charge weapons, anti-tank missiles, or modern infantry anti-armor tactics, remember the 7-pound magnetic mine that started it all. Remember the German engineers who perfected the Monroe effect into a handheld weapon. Remember the Soviet tankers who heard that terrible magnetic clang and had 5 seconds to escape. And remember the thousands of soldiers who carried these weapons into battle knowing they probably wouldn't come back. If you loved discovering the deadly secrets of WW2 weapons, make sure to subscribe because a new video revealing even more hidden truths is coming very soon. History's most devastating weapons weren't always the biggest or most expensive. Sometimes they were just the smartest, the most desperate, and the most deadly. The magnetic mine that stuck to tanks like death itself proved that in war, the simplest solution can be the most terrible. And the smallest weapon can change everything.